I don't know if you saw that sound bite. I read your op-ed piece, and I understand that the president gets very colloquial at times, but in your view, this is anything but a little squabble.
Yeah, Joe, I think what's interesting is that in your co-host for this hour, Tom Friedman, can tell you that I think it was almost 2 years ago to the week that Tom came back from Beijing, came to the West Wing of the White House, and we sat in my small office we called the War Room, just down from the Oval Office, and had this exact same discussion. China has been running an economic war. If I talked on CNBC at your conference last summer and the many times I've been on here, China's been running an economic war against the industrial democracies for now 20 years. And eventually, when the companies, as Tom laid out in his op-ed piece this week, when the companies stopped making money, people realized with Made in China 2025, One Belt, One Road, and Huawei's 5G rollout, this is a master plan to become an economic hegemon. This is why that 175 to 200-page contract wasn't really about the trade aspects of it. It really wasn't about how many soybeans they're going to buy, et cetera. The fundamental parts were to go into these deep verticals of state capitalism and demand transparency and accountability, to demand monitoring and enforcement. And that's why when the Chinese finally woke up, after 9 months of negotiating with President Trump and Bob Lighthizer, they refused and basically walked away from the deal because they understood that they've been running an economic war in this, that this is not a trade deal. This is a truce and an economic war, an armistice, so to speak, and that they weren't prepared to do it. And I think you've seen over the last 48 hours what their response has been to trying to jack up the hyper-nationalism. But as Tom Friedman ended his column, this is not a front-page business story. This is history in real time. It's the most significant thing that any president could possibly do. This cuts to the core of what the United States is going to be in the future and what our geostrategic relationship is going to be with China.
Well, that sounds like when we talk about the stock market, we have analysts give us near-term, intermediate-term, and long-term projections. And I think we need to break this down into that as well, because long-term, it seems like this is going to go on for years, but there's going to be near-term developments that are going to be required by whoever's watching this. We're going to need to know something within the next month, or as the election comes closer in 2020, we're going to need some type of agreement, some type of understanding to talk more later, because with what you're presenting to me, Steve, it looks like a lose-lose. I don't see how China ever would agree to what we need them agree to get a real trade deal.
I disagree with this. I think it actually will be a win-win. The system that China has, particularly the slave labor they have now in the Chinese population, this is about this radical cadre in the CCP. You cannot possibly have this totalitarian surveillance state. It can't exist. You have the industrial democracies, okay? What we're trying to do, and I think what Trump is trying to do very thoughtfully, is to bring them into really a world system, a system that Tom Friedman and others have talked about. The problem is we allowed the City of London, Wall Street, and the corporatists to create a system that worked for them and didn't work for working class people, whether those people are in Ohio or Michigan or Wisconsin or here in Germany. This is why Donald Trump's president of the United States, it was as J.D. Vance points out, it's the sending of the factories to China, the loss of the jobs, and the importation of the opioids because of this crisis of kind of angst that has developed this crisis in the upper Midwest. That's why Joe Biden kicked off his campaign in Pittsburgh. People understand that this is where the presidential election of 20 is going to be decided. It is where the presidential election in 16 was decided. This can be a win. The Chinese business model cannot continue, and it won't continue. You can stop it by stopping the forced technology transfers, allowing the intellectual property and industrial espionage to stop, and stop financing it. We have full capabilities in the West to stop this right now and help China evolve into a real industrial power along rules, the rule of law, and everything that they've agreed to for 20 years that they haven't played by. Not just not played by, done the exact opposite. And I think it's now time for people to stop harping. You know, the Fear Project, particularly the Wall Street cheerleaders and their pom-poms, the Fear Project didn't work. The stock market didn't implode. The U.S. economy didn't implode. In fact, with Trump's trade policies, we're getting a boost now from trade. Import prices are dropping. Employment's up. So now they're going to go to the farmers. They're going to try the Fear Project by the Wall Street junta and the corporatists are going to try to take President Trump off of this very focused approach he has to really bring the world together in peace and prosperity.
Steve, I guess my point about it being lose-lose, I don't know how we could expect China to agree to give up some of these core principles or advantages that allow them to compete in technology. As you point out, a lot of that has been through IP theft. So in your article, you say Germany, South Korea, Japan, if they were precluded from stealing the intellectual property, they'd be also-rans in a lot of these industries. What would cause them to agree to any type of, to come into the 21st century like you want them to do? What would cause them to say, sure, we'll do this? They won't.
They won't unless they're forced, and that's what this agreement's about. Remember, what they walked away from was the detail that Lighthizer had in this agreement on both real-time monitoring and enforcement. And this was not to have some regulatory apparatus. This was to put into Chinese law. So they couldn't sit there later on and retrade the president, retrade the United States. The way you do this is you do it. You cut off the technology, you stop the forced technology transfers. You saw this NPR piece where the companies that had all the technology ripped off didn't want to raise their heads. They were afraid of retaliation. You stop the retaliation, and most importantly, you get the Wall Street hedge funds and the money managers and the investment banks, and you cut off the capital. If you cut off the capital, you stop them stealing the technology, you stop the forced technology transfers, you stop them from exporting deflation and overcapacity by these subsidies of state-owned industries. If you just make them play by the rules they've already agreed to, okay, it will be a transitional period, but on the other side, China will actually join us as an industrial power. We're not sitting there. This is not against the Chinese people. I have a great affinity. I've lived there. I've owned businesses there. This is about this radical cadre of the CCP that has an unsustainable business model. It's incumbent upon us. We have all the cards. We have all the cards. And now that's what Donald Trump's showing immense leadership in trying to do this. It'd be very easy for him to sign some trade deal where they bought more soybeans and have the cheerleaders on Wall Street say, this is terrific, have the stock market go up for a moment, right? But what he's doing is looking at the long term. What people criticize him about, he doesn't have a strategic plan. He's got it. I think Tom Friedman understands it. He just wrote about it. This cuts to the core of what the world economy is going to be, and it plays to working class people, whether those people are in Germany, England, or in the United States.
It's all being done in a very public way, and I think and I'll let Tom speak for himself, but his view is that maybe diplomacy by tweet or talking so much that both sides can't save face, and it becomes, here we're seeing the nationalism rise on both sides. Tom, you think it might be better to do it behind the scenes?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with so much of what Steve said and wrote today, and have been saying this for a while. And the stakes of this moment, I think people don't fully appreciate, and I think that therefore the difficulty of this moment, I don't think people fully appreciate. Steve, give me your analysis of the politics. So I happen to believe China's misreading of Trump and America on this issue is actually one of the biggest intelligence failures of the Chinese government ever. And it was an avoidable failure because a lot of what you've been saying, I've been saying, I actually learned from the American business community in China. They actually flipped on this issue a couple of years ago. But I picked up the Washington Post today and I saw an article about how Republicans are now really breaking with the president, particularly from ag districts. Give me your analysis of the Republican politics on this issue and whether you think the president will be able to hold firm.
Remember, Tom, when you came to the White House this time, 2 years ago, you come back from Beijing, we had this exact discussion. Yeah. Remember, the biggest pressure the president's got is kind of from his allies. It's both the Republican free trader, and you can't have free trade when the system is half mercantilist and half free trade. That's what Trump's going after. And I think you're correct. The politics of this is that the Republicans have really put the most pressure on him. His allies on Wall Street have put the pressure on him, not understanding that this is the main thing. This is what it's about. This is going to set the world and it's in one direction or the other for the next 20, 30, 40, or 50 years. And we've let this drift for so long with people that really didn't have their national interests in mind. They had their own self-interest in mind. That's why this is so important. I hate to say it, I would like to see a process started that you had, like in Mar-a-Lago, you had President Trump and President Xi more directly engaged. I think Li Hu, who's a reformer, and Lighthizer are fantastic as negotiators. I think this needs to be principles. I think it needs to be principles face-to-face. But I got to tell you, there is no chance Donald Trump backs down for this. I think he's looking at the good of people on a global basis. I don't see him backing down on this. I think he's going to set the framework for the 2020 election. This is as important as it gets, but I do agree with you. I think we need the leaders, and I think we need to take the heat down, and I think they need to get behind closed doors and start a process that's going to take a long time to take. This is not going to take place overnight. This is not going to take place at the G20. The differences here are too fundamental.
Steve, what are you hearing from, you're over in Berlin now, what are you hearing from Europeans? Because they actually, this never should have been a story about us and China alone. This has always seemed to me a story of both the Europeans and our Asian allies. It is why I supported TPP and why I did oppose the steel and aluminum tariffs on Europe. I think we all needed to line up shoulder to shoulder on this. It should not be us alone, because if you talk to the Europeans, and I'm sure you have, they have the exact same problems we have. What are you hearing over there? What are they saying about our strategy?
See, but I think Trump's strategy here is working. These bilateral deals with Korea, increased defense spending, a bilateral deal with Japan, now a bilateral deal is going to get into with the EU. It's here in Germany. Their business model of advanced precision manufacturing is what's going to be gutted first. Yeah. They are at the tip of the spear. When you look at Made in China 2025, it's the great, you mentioned in your article, KUKA, the great robotics company, is the centerpiece that they've taken. It's Germany's business model. When I talk to both politicians, think tank people, and business people, they understand the storm is right over the horizon. They're going to be the tip of the spear. They're really going to be, I think, the first industrial power that's really gutted. And the Europeans understand, but you got to remember something. The EU were just like Hillary Clinton and these people. The elites in our country, Tom, and you know this, they thought the rise of China on this business model of China was like the second law of thermodynamics. It was some physical reality we just had to accept. Thucydides' trap says we're the declining power. They're the rising power. What Donald Trump said is you've got it wrong. We're the not only rising power, we're the dominant power, and we're going to reform the world along lines of free market democratic capitalism. And here's how it's going to be. You've got to break, you've got to lance the boil. And that's what Donald Trump is doing right now. I think our European allies are going to come around. I think they're going to individually come around to this because I think they see the wisdom and the toughness of what Trump's doing.
Steve, it's always been clear to me the Chinese wanted to negotiate with Mnuchin and not Lighthizer. Because I think Lighthizer is someone who knows every carpet the Chinese have sold us over the last 30 years. How do you think that will play out in the administration?
I think you're dead spot on. I think Bob Light, I look at President Trump from my M&A days at Goldman Sachs, Trump is like the chairman, CEO of the company in a massive bet the company M&A, and Lighthizer is the Skadden-Arps partner, that's your deal lawyer. Bob Lighthizer, there's no gap between Lighthizer and President Trump. Lighthizer is the guy that does the execution. That contract, when people actually end up seeing it, I think we'll see how thoughtful it is, how well crafted it is, how it actually works for the Chinese. It takes care of a lot of their corruption issues. This is about transparency. It's about accountability. It's about real-time monitoring. And it's about enforcement. What Lighthizer did with Li Hu, and Li Hu, people should understand, is also one of the greatest men in the world, I think. He's a reformer in China. He understands what has to happen to their system. These two have worked together for 9 months. It was the hawks. It was after the Belt Road Initiative Forum in China, when the hawks like Wang Qishan and others got around Xi and said, hey, why do we need the Americans? We got to toughen. This is nothing more than a port treaty from the 19th century. This is what started the 200 years of humiliation. We have to shut this down now. So that red line they sent around was basically say, we're not going to take any of the things that Lighthizer and Li Hu have negotiated for 9 months, the basic architecture of the deal. That's why this is a defining moment. And every president beforehand, Clinton, Bush, and Obama, have all blinked. Trump didn't blink. He could have cut a deal that made him look like a hero. He said, we're not doing this. We're not going to be retraded. This is what I need. Lighthizer, you told me you're going to get this. Let's just power through this.
I want to talk about lancing the boil, Steve. I understand the long term, the goal of this. I actually agree with the goal of that myself as well, but overlay politics on this. I mean, if lancing the boil causes an economic downturn, if lancing the boil causes a decline in the stock market of more than 10%, and it's around election time, what happens to the resolve?
First off, I don't think that's going to happen, but I think you realize with Joe Biden launching in Pennsylvania, this is going to be the debate. The American workers, the men and women that saw those factories leave, the American farmers, understand these are patriots. They put the national interests of the country before their own personal interests. They've seen the elites totally do this for themselves. They understand they have a voice in the room that's looking out for them and looking out for their children and grandchildren. China's business model is an existential threat to the industrial democracies, the United States, Germany, England, Japan, Korea, all of us. It has to be done now. There may be some short-term pain, okay? But Donald Trump and I think others understand we have to power through this. Now, it turns out that the numbers on Trump's plan are actually better. The 3.2% growth is driven by the decline in exports from China. The import prices are falling, right? The employment, a lot of it's tied to this. So right now, this is working. I happen to think, and I think Trump believes, and the people around Trump believe it's going to continue to work. But I got to tell you, he's not going to back down from this. This is the core of why he's president of the United States. This is the core of America in decline. This is the turnaround of America. This is bringing manufacturing jobs back. I believe those citizens in those northern industrial states will say, hey, this guy finally stood up to him, started bringing the supply chain back, and I'm with him.
Steve, this is I don't know if we'll do this again. I'd like to. I'll let you know next time we do this, Tom. And Tom will be back. Maybe you'll be back. I don't know if we'll have a great shot like that of the Brandenburg Gate, but this has been compelling, and we appreciate it. And we wish you well and safe travels.